Tonight,
welcome.
Secretary Blinken back in Israel to brief the Prime Minister as ceasefire negotiations with Hamas stall out. Plus, the Supreme Court takes on a case that could disqualify Donald Trump from the 2024 ballot. And
now, just because this vote failed doesn't mean the impeachment effort is over.
after failing to secure the votes, House GOP leaders plan another attempt to move forward with the impeachment trial of Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Hope for an Israeli ceasefire dims as Hamas keeps holding hostages. Good evening, I'm Jenna Browder.
From Washington, I'm John Jessup. Welcome to Faith Nation. Well, momentum is stalling tonight as Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu refuses the terms of a ceasefire with Hamas.
He's vowing instead to continue attacks until the Jewish state sees, quote, absolute victory over the terror group in Gaza, saying military power is the only way to free the hostages remaining.
Antony Blinken, America's top diplomat, met with Netanyahu in Israel today, hoping to advance a ceasefire framework. He says hostages are a top priority.
Sheer agony, not knowing the fate of your loved one. It's almost unimaginable. And I know that that pain is almost unbearable. So we have been intensely focused from day one on getting the hostages, all the hostages, back with their families where they belong. And we will keep that focus.
Meanwhile, family members of some of the remaining hostages met with U.S. lawmakers calling for freedom for their loved ones.
The American anthem is the land of the free and the home of the brave. And Romy is the bravest person I know, and she must be free.
More than 100 hostages remain. David Daud is a senior fellow focused on Lebanon and Hezbollah at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and he's with us now for more. David, welcome. So Secretary Blinken today says there were some serious or some clear non-starters, as he put it, in the Hamas hostage offer. Let's start with your reaction to Netanyahu's rejection of this deal.
Thank you for having me on. Look, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu was absolutely correct in rejecting the deal. From the outset, I think Hamas's strategy behind taking the hostages was to place Israel before a moral dilemma that it would have to constantly take into account while fighting a war, which is, do you prosecute this war to its conclusion and eliminate this threat to Israel, this terrible threat to Israel? The organization itself has said they're going to commit October 7th attack after October 7th attack until Israel falls apart, or do you rescue the hostages that are being held in captivity? Now, again, this is a terrible moral dilemma, but I think Prime Minister Netanyahu made the right choice looking at the long-term interests of the state of Israel and basically trying to eliminate this wild card that Hamas thinks it can use to stop Israel's military efforts in their tracks.
David, this war is now the deadliest conflict between the two sides since Israel's founding back in 1948. Netanyahu has said Israel is committed to, quote, absolute victory over Hamas. How long do you think that would take? And also, do you think the United States and other allies have the patience to see this through?
Look, I think it's hard to estimate at the outset. Urban conflict in general is one of the most grueling and difficult forms of conflict. This is not two armies meeting in an open desert. Israeli soldiers have to go house to house, neighborhood to neighborhood to clear out an infrastructure that has been built up over 20 years. It took, by point of comparison, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu pointed this out during his press conference today, it took the coalition forces almost 9 months to eliminate something like 5,000 ISIS terrorists in Mosul. Hamas has built up a much larger military infrastructure. Gaza Strip is much larger than Mosul. And let's not forget the fact that we have at least 450 miles of tunnels under the Gaza Strip that also have to be cleared out. This is a span of territory that, is longer than a drive from Washington, D.C. to Boston, just to give you a point of comparison. At the same time, the Israelis have been saying that they've put 75% Hamas's fighting force out of commission so far within 4 months. So I'm inclined to believe, given the pace of Israel's military efforts so far, that Prime Minister Netanyahu was correct in saying this could take months and not years. At the same time, I think we should be cautious about putting an exact end date on such a complex operation.
All right, David Daud with FDD, thank you for your insights this evening. Great to have you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you for having me.
Well, one of the many legal issues facing former President Trump goes before the Supreme Court this week. Tomorrow, the justices will hear arguments over whether individual states can remove Trump from the 2024 ballot.
Yeah, it has to do with his role in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. The CBN News White House correspondent Abigail Robertson is at the Supreme Court this evening and joins us with a preview of tomorrow's arguments. Abigail?
Well, this landmark case largely hinges on how the word insurrection is defined, if January 6th fits that definition, and whether or not the justices rule that Trump played a major part.
Even though President Trump didn't engage in that behavior directly, they might argue that he encouraged it and therefore would be part of the process of insurrection. In December, the Colorado State Supreme Court disqualified Trump from holding the office of president under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, asserting he's ineligible because he engaged in insurrection on January 6, 2021, after swearing an oath as president to support the U.S. Constitution. The Constitution uses the word officer, but it doesn't define president necessarily as one of those officers. It lists other officers clearly, but it doesn't say the presidency is included. So there's going to be some question about whether or not it actually includes the President of the United States. In their opening brief to the court, Trump's lawyers called for a reversal of Colorado's decision because the president is not an officer of the United States under the Constitution.
The Supreme Court in the past has said that officers of the United States refers to people who are appointed by the president, but not the president himself. Therefore, the president is not one of the people that is covered by that clause, that section of the 14th Amendment.
Trump's lawyers are also calling for a swift and decisive end to these ballot disqualification efforts, which threaten to disenfranchise tens of millions of Americans and which promise to unleash chaos and bedlam. John Malcolm from the Heritage Foundation tells CBN News he expects a quick ruling.
If they affirm the Colorado Supreme Court, then he will be off the ballot everywhere. And of course, if they reverse the Colorado Supreme Court, he will be on the ballot everywhere.
The Supreme Court has received hundreds of pages of documents in support of Trump's appeal from people including almost 200 congressional Republicans and several of Trump's former 2024 GOP rivals. John, Jenna.
Abby, today Democratic Senator Dick Durbin called on Justice Clarence Thomas to recuse himself from tomorrow's case. What's that all about?
This is related to the fact that Ginny Thomas, Justice Thomas's wife, has testified before the January 6th committee because she exchanged text messages with Mark Meadows, Trump's former chief of staff, regarding efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Now, Justice Thomas has previously recused himself from Supreme Court cases involving January 6th, so Senator Durbin is calling him to do so again. And I will just say, here at the Supreme Court, there's already a line of people waiting to get into tomorrow's arguments. They're going to be a very big deal, and I imagine there are going to be hundreds of people out here tomorrow at 10 a.m. when the Supreme Court hears this case.
Most certainly. All right, Abigail Robertson at the Supreme Court this evening. Thank you, Abigail.
Thanks, Abby. Well, the bipartisan Senate deal in the works for months has fallen apart. The House GOP vowed to kill the measure if it made it past the upper chamber, a move Democrats claim is an effort to boost former President Trump's re-election campaign.
We knew about a week ago when Trump mixed in and said, wanted to be political and said he'd prefer chaos at the border because he thinks it helps him electorally. Donald Trump wants chaos. Donald Trump does not want success at the border.
Well, let's bring in CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka. Matt, the border deal seemingly hit a dead end even before it was officially released. We know that there was a foreign aid package tied up to it. So is there a backup plan?
Well, John, Jenna, the Senate is hoping for the rest of that national security bill to go forward without that border package included. That includes Ukraine aid, Israel aid, and aid for Taiwan. But the death of that border deal isn't sitting well with the lead Republican negotiator, James Lankford of Oklahoma, who told his colleagues today they were elected to solve problems. And if they refuse compromise, then nothing gets done.
Quite frankly, I don't blame Americans for being really angry and frustrated where we are at the border. Really angry and frustrated. But what I hear from most Oklahomans is do something. Don't just sit there. Do something. Make progress. But don't allow this to keep going. Stop it where you can. So that's what we work to do.
Now, the Senate ultimately opted not to advance the bipartisan border deal, meaning it's highly doubtful Congress will do anything border-related before the election, but it's not impossible. We could see a surprise amendment pop up, maybe.
Yeah. Matt, the border was front and center in the House this week, too. Republicans tried and failed to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Was that a blunder by the House Speaker?
Well, it was certainly a shocker to House Republicans, who almost certainly wouldn't have brought that vote to the floor if they didn't think they had the votes. 3 Republicans voted against the measure and eventually a 4th flipped so they could possibly take up the vote again in the future, something the House Speaker says will happen.
Last night was a setback, but democracy is messy. We live in a time of divided government. We have a razor-thin margin here, and every vote counts. Sometimes when you're counting votes and people show up when they're not expected to be in the building, it changes the equation. But listen, we have a duty and a responsibility to take care of this issue. We have to hold the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security accountable. Mayorkas needs to be held accountable. The Biden administration needs to be held accountable, and we will pass those articles of impeachment.
Now, the timing on that, very uncertain, with a very thin Republican majority that could get even slimmer next week. A special election is being held to replace ousted former Congressman George Santos. And if a Democrat wins and flips that seat in New York, the GOP majority would shrink to just 6 seats, meaning every vote will matter again if they bring impeachment back up.
Oh, I hear that saying, the plot thickens.
Yes, and we always got to keep an eye on the math, too, huh?
That's absolutely right. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka. Thanks so much, Matt.
Abortion in an election year. Florida's Supreme Court hears arguments over a potential 2024 ballot measure protecting access to the procedure. That story and more next on Faith Nation. Stakes are high in the Sunshine State as the state Supreme Court considers if Floridians should get to vote on a new state law guaranteeing access to abortion.
It's one of several states where abortion could be on the ballot this November. CBN Washington correspondent Hillary Powell has been following the case. Hillary, how will this affect Florida families?
Well, John, Jenna, the future of abortion access really comes down to wording. Supporters want to preserve a state constitutional right to abortion, while critics see it as a total deregulation of the procedure. Now, before voters even see a ballot measure, the state Supreme Court justices must approve the wording, and both sides are weighing in on the issue.
Is this hiding a ball in some meaningful way, or should we not say, the voters can look at this and say, gee, that sounds really sweeping, let's not approve this?
Here's the current language. No law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health, as determined by the patient's health care provider. This amendment does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require notification to a parent or guardian before a minor has an abortion. The Florida Attorney General wants the court to reject that version, saying the word viability is unclear.
The language of the amendment itself is of such elasticity that an enormously wide range of meanings will attach to it, and voters will not actually understand what they are voting for.
A 15-week ban on abortion currently exists in the state. The group Floridians Protecting Freedom collected 1 million signatures to get the measure protecting abortion access on the ballot. This fight is reflective of a nationwide push for states to decide the issue. Since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, 7 states have voted in favor of abortion access, including conservative-leaning states like Kansas, Kentucky, and most recently, Ohio. Matt Staver with Florida Voters Against Extremism says the proposal's words have real-world impact.
It is a devastating amendment that they're looking at here. It is exceptionally broad and very, very dangerous, not only to children and families, but to all of Floridians and certainly all of society, because this would create Florida as not just a vacation destination, but an abortion destination.
GOP Governor Ron DeSantis has appointed 5 of the 7 justices, as well as Attorney General Ashley Moody. Now, justices previously held Article 1, Section 23 of the state constitution already protects access to abortion, although a law signed by DeSantis would outlaw abortion after 15 weeks. Guys.
All right, CBN correspondent Hillary Powell. Thank you, Hillary. Well, Kelsey Pritchard is the Director of State Public Affairs for Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America. Kelsey, welcome to you. So the pro-life movement for decades has said the abortion battle belongs in the states. A state constitutional amendment initiative would put that fight to Florida voters. Putting you on the spot a little bit here, Kelsey, but why do you think the measure isn't the right move?
Well, the Florida measure is very similar to what we've seen in states like Ohio and Michigan, in that it allows abortion in all 9 months of pregnancy. It also takes away parental rights, and it puts at stake women's health and safety protections and any regulation on the abortion industry right now. And in Florida specifically, this is not an industry that we want to go unregulated, because we saw a Sarasota, Florida facility that was shut down last year because so many women ended up in the hospital from that facility. And in inspections last year, 25% of those in the industry failed their inspection. So very dangerous. And even those who are on the pro-choice side really need to consider about the implications of this measure to women and parents, as well as to the unborn child.
Kelsey, since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, what has marked the biggest change in the work for pro-life organizations like yours?
Yeah, the Dobbs decision has allowed us to actually make changes in the states. And we're not even 2 years out from that decision. And we now have 24 states across the nation that have laws protecting life at 12 weeks or sooner. So that is a huge gain. That's incredible momentum. We have data that shows that the birth rates in a lot of those states with pro-life laws have increased. So we have more babies being born in those states. And also the Dobbs decision has allowed for the federal government as well to be able to make policy on abortion and to protect lives. And so we are very adamant that we need a national defender of life in the White House, and that we need to elect more pro-life senators and Congress members so that we can at least protect babies at the point that they feel pain across this country. And that's because babies in California matters just as much as the babies in Texas and South Dakota.
Kelsey, does your group support a federal ban on abortion?
We support a federal protection, a federal minimum protection that is in line with public sentiment. And we see poll after poll that shows that 2/3 of Americans support limiting abortion in the second and third trimesters. So after that first trimester mark, people do want the baby protected. Even people who consider themselves pro-choice want protections at the second and third trimester. And so while we believe that life begins at conception, we believe we need to start somewhere, and we need to meet the people where they're at. And this is where public opinion is. And so we are very supportive of a federal minimum protection at 15 weeks, which is the point when a baby can feel pain.
All right, Kelsey Pritchard with the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
All right, the 2024 race for the White House. When we come back, we break down Tuesday's Nevada primary results. Welcome back. Does allowing teens to transition gender socially or medically lead to better mental health outcomes for those struggling with gender dysphoria? After reviewing more than 60 studies on the matter, the American College of Pediatricians says no, highlighting the already heightened risk of mental health issues in those with gender dysphoria. The group notes social transitioning, puberty blockers, and hormone therapy have no demonstrable long-term benefits psychologically. In a new position statement on the matter, the American College of Pediatricians says, quote, It cannot condone the social affirmation, medical intervention, or surgical mutilation of children and adolescents identifying as transgender or gender nonconforming. Rather, intensive psychotherapy for individual and a family to determine and hopefully treat the underlying etiology of their gender incongruence should be pursued.
Well, a shakeup in the GOP. Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel is stepping down. The New York Times reports McDaniel has told the 2024 party frontrunner, Donald Trump, that she'll leave the role shortly after the South Carolina primary later this month. Trump seemed to hint at the shift on Truth Social, saying he and McDaniel will, quote, be making a decision the day after the South Carolina primary as to my recommendations for RNC growth. Well, a bit of a nightmare night for Nikki Haley in Nevada's presidential primary. The former UN ambassador failed to win the GOP backing, even though Donald Trump's name wasn't on the ballot. The majority of Republicans instead opted for none of these candidates. The optics are bad, but mostly symbolic since no delegates were awarded in the primary. The actual delegates will be determined in a separate Republican caucus tomorrow, in which Haley is not participating. Trump is a shoo-in for all 26 Nevada GOP delegates.
Coming up, a German Shepherd puppy won't be defined by his disability. That's next on Faith Nation.
Well, finally tonight, technology has come a long way in helping people with physical disabilities.
Yeah, and that goes for our furry friends, too. And it's giving a German Shepherd in Mississippi a second chance at life. The 6-month-old puppy named Nemo was born without his back right paw. Thanks to a local animal rescue, Nemo's story spread on social media and caught the attention of Buckner Prosthetics. The clinic stepped in to give Nemo some support, quite literally. Nemo was fitted with a boot, quickly getting comfortable with it before being adopted into his forever home. His new owner has agreed to let Nemo come back to the clinic to hang out with the other prosthetic patients and give them hope. He is so cute, those German Shepherds.
I was just about to say, cute dog, and look at him. He's going to be able to get around much easier these days.
Yeah, good for Nemo.
Yep.
All right, that's going to do it for Faith Nation.
Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.